Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. And I'm absolutely thrilled and excited to have Ben Dominitz with us today. Ben is a very special human being. And in a few moments, you'll hear about the many, many accomplishments. I first want to speak to the human being and to how Ben and I met. Ben is a chair for something called Vistage, which is a company that offers peer advisory groups for senior executives. And Ben has been a chair for some of those groups for the past few years, and I got to speak with one of his groups. And in fact, it was the very last presentation before retirement. And what I saw was a person who deeply, deeply cares about others. And that extends in many, many areas of his life. So let me share with you a little bit about Ben's accomplishments, and then we'll get to know the person behind the accomplishments even more in order to support you, all of you who are listening, to create your best life as well. Ben is the founder and the former CEO of a company called Prima Communications, and that's a book publishing and internet content provider that he sold to Random House in the early 2000s for it grew to 100 million in revenue. And I mean, many, many accomplishments. Ben, you've accomplished many things in the world of music, in terms of being an author, being on the Oprah show, right? Many things that are quite extraordinary. And I'm curious if you would be willing to share with us, kind of to kick us off here, a little bit about how that all came about. Because I know a little bit about your background, and I know at the age of 13, at the tender age of 13, you were invited to join Juilliard, the pre-college division, and left Israel in order to be able to do that. That's a pretty impressive thing for a 13-year-old. And I'm curious to know a little bit about that boy back then that became the man that you are today. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your background?
I'll be happy to. Thank you so much, Vered, and thank you so much for the invitation. I also have felt the kindred spirit with you from the moment I began interacting with you. So thank you so much for this invitation. I was a pretty confused little boy. I did not come from a family where there are clear traditions. There was a lot of conflict. The violin was my one thing that I had certainty about. I really wanted to play the violin from the age of 7. My parents were not in a particularly good place when I asked to play the violin, and so they ignored the request. And then, imagine this little boy going to his parents' bedroom and saying, "If I don't get a violin for Hanukkah, I don't want to live." So that was such a dramatic statement that they took it and brought me a horrible violin and gave me a very bad teacher, but he was cheap. And so that's how I started. But later on, was able to move to a well-renowned teacher who had quite a track record in helping students do well, and began the process of fixing all the violin is such an instrument of such complexity that, unlike the piano, you really have to get it right. So if you have children who are going to be playing a string instrument like the violin or the cello or viola, make sure they get a good teacher. At any rate, I was able to proceed, and the opportunity came for me to come to New York and to study with Dorothy DeLay, who was also the teacher of Itzhak Perlman. And that was an amazing opportunity. So I did have to audition to play for them. And I remember, the only thing I remember what I played. I don't remember how I played it because I had 104 fever. But I knew that I had to do the audition. I could not miss it. So I remember my mother and I went to the subway from Brooklyn all the way up to uptown New York, 122nd Street to Claremont Avenue, and 122nd where Juilliard was. Now it's the Manhattan School of Music is there. Juilliard is now at Lincoln Center. But I came and I played, and luckily enough, I got a scholarship because we absolutely had to have a scholarship. So they forgave me whatever it came out of my violin on that date, and and I was enrolled and with a wonderful teacher. And so, I did not really know who I was, but there were only inklings, and most of us don't know who we are. I think college, for many of us, begins to give us some idea of who we are, but a lot of kids might start with a very clearly defined father figure, mother figure, traditions and structure. I didn't have that, so I was a little wild, and it really took my being sent to study with Walter Levine of the La Salle Quartet in Cincinnati for my undergraduate to really get a teacher who had the kind of discipline and who was authoritarian but very strong and really a kind of a father figure who was very no nonsense and I think reveled in having a reputation of being very tough. And I was full of myself one time we were working on a Mozart concerto, and I said, Mr. Levine, in my opinion, and he stopped me, he said, Ben, he said, when you're ready to give an opinion, I'll ask you. At this point, I don't really care about your opinion. Now, that stung, but it was one of the most important thing anybody said to me, because I realized, in other words, he was saying, who do you think you are? To tell me your opinion, you're still at the early stages of learning how to form a musical opinion. It was strong, it was tough, but it was what I needed because I could walk over people who were too soft, and he was not that person. I'm very grateful to him for that.
Well, thank you for sharing this. It's pretty incredible for a little boy to, connect with a passion and demand what he wanted, and then to be open to learning throughout the years, open to possibilities. And I'm curious, how has that spirit inside of you, this spirit of tuning into what's important to you and making that happen, how has that served you throughout life? And when have you been challenged on that?
Well, I think that I've been challenged many times because sometimes I took a path that didn't work out. But I do think that one of the things that people who want to be independent might need to develop, I think they do need to develop, is what I would call the I will until mindset. And that means and it's a two-edged sword, but it says that you will find a way, you will find solutions, you will not be stymied by a wall. And later on, I really understood that if 60% of the people stop at wall 1 and 20% of the people stop at wall 2 and another 10 or 15% stop at wall 3, only a few get beyond that point, and those are the ones who really can achieve things that society cannot expect from others. So this I will until, the idea that resistance can be a sign that you are going in the wrong direction, or simply can be a sign that you are now beginning to move to a new level, is something that's very important to understand. The wisdom to know which is hard to find, and I certainly have made some mistakes in that regard.
Thank you. And I'm curious, how would you advise someone who, has this I will attitude and takes some actions and continuously falls down? Yeah. How does one stay resilient to continue until? Yeah.
You're right. It's a profoundly important question, Vered. And I think that the first question is to ask, why am I proceeding? Why is it important to me? And number two, am I fulfilling an ego need, or is this really the right way for me to go? Wow. Because sometimes we find that maybe the world is telling us something. Now, there's no such thing as failure. Failure is finding out something that doesn't work for us. The question is it not working for us because we're not putting our efforts properly to it, or is it not working for us because the world is telling us that we're not the right person to proceed in that particular direction? We have other strengths, and we're going against our strengths. So that knowing which is really what I would call the path to wisdom. And it's not always easy to know.
Hmm. Yeah, and I sense based on kind of what you shared around going to the meaning behind the intention, as you said, why is this important to me? And
Right.
and really
Yeah.
tuning in.
Often, we are told by a parent that we should do something, and then we proceed to do that, and then we end up doing it and realize we're not happy. How many attorneys are out there? How many doctors out there who really are not happy doing what they're doing? And that's probably because they were following somebody else's edict and pursued it with diligence, but they didn't end up doing something that really resonates with their life.
And for everyone who's listening now, who's at that place and has fear because they need to support their family and they want and they don't have the certainty. Yeah. What would you advise, guide those individuals to really help them step into their potential, their desire?
Well, I think there are different paths, but one of them that I happen to find useful is to work with someone like you and also take some assessments that are objective, that are good assessments that tell us where we are likely to be best fit at. I think that often we don't take that and we just rely on our own whatever. And there are tools out there that can really help. I remember when I was wondering whether I could start a publishing company, that I took some of those assessments, not necessarily the best ones, and it showed that that I was halfway between artistic and business, and that I was a business person internally as well, which is kind of unusual. Mostly you're one or the other. I was both.
And tell us a little bit about that journey, because starting a company like that and growing it to what it was must have taken certain strengths, a certain level of resilience, I would imagine, doing anything new, especially something like that. So what do you believe have been some of the mindsets, the beliefs that really supported you in kind of going from, an idea to taking it to where it was?
Although I had no experience in business, not much, and certainly not in publishing, um, I, I had the confidence that I can figure it out.
Hmm.
And in fact, I bought a book on self-publishing and kind of uses as my manual, like driving manual. I remember telling the author, and he still talks about that to this day. But the Dan Poynter wrote a book about the self-publishing handbook, and I kind of use it. This is how you get copyright. How you do this. Here's how you do that. And I just followed it to get the basic first book done. Later on, we actually ended up creating the most sophisticated and efficient book publishing software in our company with the help of my second in command, who was very savvy in IT matters. But but in the beginning, we just did it very much by rote and figured it out. We designed a cover. My wife, who's a wonderful editor, was editing. It was kind of very much of a home-based business to begin with, that later on grew to become one of the larger privately held publishing companies in the country. It was very, very gradual.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people, myself included, when I heard that, I went, what, really? Meaning, you didn't know how to do it. So you went and you got a book, and it was so simple, because it's you assume that someone who's got that vision would already have all the skills and all the steps and everything, all the ducks lined up in a row. And what I'm hearing is that what you had was two things. You had a curiosity, well, three things. First of all, you had the confidence to know that you could do it, that's that mindset, to the I will until that you're demonstrating here. And secondly, you had a curiosity and a willingness to learn what it takes, to not allow the ego to to step in too much, to be humble and say, you know what, I can learn this. And if I need to go and pick up a book, I will do that, and I'll learn what it takes, and we'll figure it out. And 3, you had a support system. You had your second in command. You had, your wife. You had people that were there to support, to fill in gaps that, in your words, were not necessarily your strengths. So how important is that support system, would you say, to someone who's starting out?
Well, when I started out, I only had my wife. And then we had a wonderful secretary who was very helpful, but I didn't have the second in command. That came later, about 7 years later.
Oh.
And he came into the company at a different level, and I realized that he was slumming it, that his capacity was much larger, and that he had done some big things already, but he just wanted to just focus on his family, and so. So that came later, but at a certain point, I realized that I needed to change my team to have a team of people who are capable to accomplish things and to do things that I didn't have the time or couldn't do them as well. And I did realize that phase 2 of a business is to develop a team of people who are better than you are in the areas they need to be better than you are. And that takes the ability not to get stuck on control and on and the ability to delegate and to people who are tried and true. And whatever strengths and weaknesses we had individually as a team, they were enormously loyal people. We really had no turnover of the key people.
And I imagine that that's a reflection of the relationship, the culture that you created in that, and the trust.
Well, my CFO then, who is still a friend, but lives in California, I live in South Carolina, always says to me that those were the best career years of his life. And it's so touching that he feels that way.
What do you think you value most?
Competence and honesty. I hate excuses. And one of the things I liked about Matt, my second in command, is he got my attention. He would come to me totally. He was not working at that time directly for me, not yet. And he came to Ben, I just want to let you know, I just goofed and I made a mistake and I want you to know about it. And he did that without asking. He wasn't hiding. He was telling me, so because he felt it was important that I knew. That was so unusual that, of course, it caught my attention. And so, I have recently in consulting, I've had to deal with management teams of people who are either narcissistic, who put their interests ahead of the company, and things like that. And it's very hard for me to deal with people like that. I can, but only for so long.
Yeah, you value the truth. You value, and it's interesting when I consider your background, the tiny little bit that you've shared with us, in terms of, I forget if his name was Walter, the gentleman that
Walter Levine, yes.
Walter Levine, that he gave that gift to you, right? That gift of honesty and raising the desire for you to be even more competent, right? To have that voice, to earn that voice, if you will.
Yes.
And
yes, I stopped on this. I stopped thinking that I was somehow anointed to become a good violinist. I realized that I had to work very hard, and that the standards were very high.
Yeah. And when I think of those values, competence and honesty, I sense that the energy underneath that is also energy of courage, because in order to be honest, to be direct with others, and to be open to listening to others when they're honest with us, when it challenges our own perceptions, our own beliefs, it requires courage, and it requires, I believe, also love, whether it's love for ourselves, to honor who we really are, what we truly believe, what we stand for, and to honor others, even, like I said, when it conflicts with our own thoughts.
Right.
How do you think that those values have served you in times of stress in your life?
Well, I think it's an incredible question because really what it leads to is the ability or inability of people to be self-reflective. In other words, I see so many people who create a narrative of victimhood and excuses rather than ownership of their successes and failures. And so at a certain point, I looked at something and I realized that the finger needs to always point at myself. And for me, I need to grow, move, improve in some specific way or a set of ways for me to be able to move to the next level of competence or next level of honesty or next level of commitment or whatever. And so it always starts with me asking myself, what can I do to be better? And I think that not some along with the mindset, I think that people, it's my opinion, if you ask people to give you a biography of themselves, what they're giving you is a narrative of who they think they want to think they are, not a biography of themselves. And I think people have a narrative. And I always want to understand someone's narrative because I want to see if there's any dysfunctionality in that narrative and what it is that they emphasize about themselves. And so, a how great I art narrative doesn't impress me, but lets me know there's a real problem. So, I want to understand people's narrative about their lives. What is their narrative? How they see themselves with and against the world, you know? And is it true? Is it true enough? Is it far-fetched? What is it?
Yeah, and I acknowledge that because I think we do have narratives, and those narratives often are there unconsciously to serve us because many of us, I know you know this is true from the work that you do as a Vista chair and from others, that many people, even at the highest level, the CEO level in an organization, have some self-doubt and sometimes believe that they're not good enough or competent enough or worthy enough, if you will, to grow and to achieve what they want. And so the ability to change the narrative requires us to be, as you said, real with ourselves, to have that kind of self-assessment and to say to ourselves, okay, this is the narrative that has gotten me to where I am today. Is this going to be good enough to go to the next level? And often that's when we need a change of narrative because it has served us to some degree, but we need to step up into higher levels of competence, of honesty, of willingness to let go of control, of willingness to take ownership, as you said. And that requires belief in ourselves. And in our own potential, which goes hand in hand with changing the narrative. Because if somebody doesn't believe that they're good enough, they often lift themselves up either by putting other people down, which sometimes is what we see, or by having this mask of accomplishment. Look at all that I've done, when really what's underneath is someone who has valued achievement as a way to value themselves, to feel that they're worthy.
Well, we all do that. We all do that to some extent, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think that, I think that there's more to that. The complexity starts when you run into people who really are. Yes, by all means, there are people who feel insecure about their position. So, for example, yesterday was my last session, as I mentioned to you, with Vistage, and people were very nice to talk about the impact that our work together has had on them. And in several cases, people said, "Here I was a CEO, I was insecure, and working with Ben, he encouraged me to understand that I had all the tools I needed to be successful." And so, for them, other people had other things, but for them, that was what they needed to have that confidence. And so And I only say that if it's true. And they were highly competent. They just didn't realize maybe exactly how to approach the work. And so that was relatively easy to help them understand because they had the tools. On the other hand, where I have not succeeded in working with people is if people have tendencies to be narcissistic. Uh, People who are narcissistic tend to be extremely stuck in that mindset, and consequently, their narrative is may come out of deep insecurity, but it's based on self gratification rather than accomplishing what needs to be accomplished. And I have not found much success dealing with those people.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it's, my sense is that individuals like that value, significance pretty highly. Yeah. And that can sometimes shadow real connection and real growth.
What I found them to unable to do is to take the information they would receive, let's say in a visitors group from their peers or myself, and to actually do something with it. So I would have people who've been in my group for 4 years and made no progress. And at a certain point, I asked them to leave
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because it was frustrating and clear to everyone that you know that they always talk about the fact that they're really going to make a difference, and it was the same thing over and over again.
So what I'm hearing here is how important it is to be honest with ourselves and to follow through on what we commit to doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a very, in a way, crude or at least very direct comment that I find to be largely true, and which is lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also leaders have to look at people in their company and said, are they are they just taking space, or are they adding value? Are they following? Are they leading? Are they producing? Or are they just hiding?
Mm-hmm.
And the company cannot afford to have people like that.
Yeah.
So I've learned to be tough-minded, loving, but tough-minded, that not everybody belongs on my team.
And Ben, I'm curious, as you reflect back on this very colorful career that you've had and life, of course, we're whole people. As you reflect back, what are some moments that have really shaped who you are? So you mentioned the moment with Walter Levine, and what are some other ones that really stick out in your mind?
I think that when I sold my company, I realized at that point my identity was so tied up with my company that it took me a year to overcome a depression and a sense of loss of purpose. And I had to understand that the company and I were not the same person, the same entity. That was very hard for me after 17, 18 years of building this baby. And so it, I began to try to individuate myself from my work a little more. And it took me a while to do that. And so that was one of it. My children and my wife taught me a great deal, because I have a wife who is very objective, and she will say what she believes independently, regardless of whether I like it or not. And I learned not to oppose, but to listen. And my children too. I raised we raised our children in such a way that they were taught to think and to be independent, and they are both very outspoken. And so when things weren't going well with them, especially as adults, I realized that I have to bear the responsibility for that, mostly. And we have a wonderful relationship with our children now, and our now new grandchild. But and it's really couldn't be better. But I realized that I had to moderate and modify how I was interacting with them in order to be the right parent for them as adults.
Mm.
I didn't have much doubt I was the right parent for them as children, but I wasn't the right parent for them as adults. I had to learn to become a parent of adult capable children.
Yeah.
Totally different. You
And
might relate.
I do, because my children are not yet adults. They're kind of moving into that, and what you're touching on is this concept of adaptability, right? Flexing our behavior to adjust to what is, and the way that we were. And this also interrelates to your other story around kind of the shift in identity, because we have certain stories about how we need to be as a parent, and parenting a young child or a young adult is very different than a full-grown adult. And it's not about changing them. It really is about how do we change to honor who they now are. And it means the shift in our perception of our identity, our role. And this concept of identity is so important. And I'm grateful that you shared kind of the struggle after you sold the company. Here you had, financial independence, what many of us crave. And yet it sounds like you were lost, and
I was.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, I returned to music and started a chamber music series a year later that lasted for 8 years, and began to conduct and give master classes, and returned and developed an identity. So a whole bunch of people now knew me as a musician again and didn't know anything about my business. So I really returned, and that was my solution. And that worked out very well.
Yeah. And this again goes back to how we started around that love in your heart. And my sense is for you to truly experience satisfaction, that soul level fulfillment is about contribution, meaningful contribution.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's really cool that you found, that you found a way to do that through Vistage, helping people who want to build businesses and create their own version of personal freedom, and and people who want to grow in their passion of music and to increase their competency in that. And you talked about your children and kind of guiding them, advising them in different ways. And if your children were with you now, let's say they were listening to this conversation now, perhaps your beautiful grandchild and your future.
She's too young, but yes.
Yes, in the future, her and other grandchildren, if they were to hear this in the future, what would what would you want them to know about their grandfather? What would you want them to carry with them throughout their life to be fulfilled, joyful individuals?
Well, I think my children know who I am. And because we have very authentic conversations, and they are at this point very much of an I-thou relationship, as opposed to I'm the dad and you're the son, so you have to listen to me. That doesn't exist anymore. We are equals, and we appear as we're 3 adults, and my wife was the 4th adult, of course. And so our conversations are based on, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that, and one of my sons is very concerned about COVID as it applies to us because we're in an older age, and I'm not as concerned, but I honor his concern. So if he says, "Dad, please don't get on an airplane and fly to see us because blah blah blah," we honor it, and that's fine. So I think my children know that I am constantly changing. I think they find it interesting that I've been able to start a completely new career, in addition to Vistage, other high-level consulting with New York Stock Exchange companies, etc., out of Charlotte, something I never did before, and they like the fact that to me the game is infinite and it's not finite. And I love them, and I cherish what they do. So, and I'm a great fan of what they do. So,
yeah.
And when I'm not, I've learned not to offer advice. Let them work it out for themselves.
And
hard for a Jewish boy to do.
And I think any parent and any leader also can connect with that, because sometimes, even as as a leader, we want to help the people on our teams and our community, if you will, to grow and expand, and we've got to honor where they are. And I'm curious. I know you are a published author. You've done some extraordinary things. As you kind of reflect back to those moments in your life where you got to do things like, meet Oprah, or, I think Regis and Cathy, if I remember, Cathy Lee, if I remember, and those kinds of things. What did you take away from those kind of extraordinary experiences? What did you learn about yourself?
Well, I learned that they are just ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things. Not that they're ordinary in their talent set, but that, and I've worked around great musicians and people who really are extraordinary, that if you separate their unique talents, by and large, they are ordinary people.
And what does
And
that mean?
sometimes people begin to think that if somebody is Clark Gable or Cary Grant, or you use somebody more contemporary today, that they don't have the same basic needs as that we do. They do. So I recently met for the first time the former leader of the Congressional Republican Party, John Boehner. And we spent a lot of time together, a couple of days where we spent a lot of time together. And, he accomplished a great deal, but he's an ordinary man, the son of a bar owner with 12 or 13 siblings that he had to kind of organize, which helped him learn how to organize the members of Congress when he was speaker. So yeah. Anyway.
Thank you, and that is such a gift that you share that. And on a personal note, what I'm getting from it is, no matter what anyone wants to achieve, anyone who's listening, and myself included, that we can do it, because we all, are ordinary people, and what we need is to develop that competency, as you said, that extraordinary skill to get feedback.
And to understand, have the courage to understand what we are not good at. I believe that the most successful people are great because they have understood their weaknesses so well that they compensate for them with other people who are strong, rather than trying to constantly insist that they should do the things that they should not be doing.
Yeah, and that's a huge mindset shift for a lot of people who are so used, as they've built their companies or built their families or whatever they've done, because they've done it because they were able to control and create certainty, and yet the kind of letting go and trusting other people, and really trusting in the universe, if you will, that things will work out okay, because there is nothing carved in stone. We don't know, and I'm curious, for someone who's at that place that they want to trust, but it's their baby, like it was your baby, the company. How do they make the leap to be able to comfortably ask for help and trust that help?
Right. So I, first of all, do not think that you should trust without evidence. To me, I believe that the saying "delegate or stagnate" is partially true. Eventually, that is correct. If we do not delegate, we can't do everything ourselves well, so we remain small. However, to delegate appropriately, one has to go through a process of, number one, making sure that you're very clear as to what you need the other person to do, and that you are sure that unless they have the experience already, that you're helping them get there, assuming you know how to do it, or get somebody else to help them. I call that process scaffolding. You say to somebody, you said, okay, you're going to start making sales calls, let's say. Let's work on what that looks like. Let's practice. I'll, then make a phone call, let me listen, make another phone call. We'll sit down and talk about what's working, what's not working. Have you try again? And then go through the scaffolding process of gradually removing yourself away because you now have developed certainty that this is the right person to do that particular task, whatever it may be. And I use sales as a metaphor. So to me, I think a lot of mistakes I've made was when I assigned work for people without knowing if they really could do the work. And so I think there is a balance between trusting and verifying. And verifying not by just saying, okay, I'll see how you do it. If not, I'll chop your head off, but rather what tools do you need to have and what do I need to teach you or do you need to be taught to be able to do this job well the way we need you to do it. And that is a responsibility for the leader. So when something doesn't work out, the first question I ask myself is, what didn't I do to help Mary get the job done? Now, maybe it was nothing that I could do because I just called it wrong and hired the wrong person, which I try not to happen too often, but does happen. People are very hard to read. But nevertheless, it's important to first look at oneself and say, am I not taking the steps necessary? Am I not allowing this person to succeed? Is my ego in the way because I really don't want him to succeed? So I can say, look, I tried, but it didn't work out. That sort of thing, that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy thing that we also do.
Wow. And it's, it's a very loving thing to do as well for others, because when we are not honest with them about what's not working, then we limit their growth to be more confident and grow their own potential.
Sure.
So it really is a win-win for everyone when we can be real. And
it may not be pleasant, and a lot of people don't know how to do it. I think that's a big issue today. People don't know how to be real. They don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so there are all kinds of people who are doing things they shouldn't be doing, not and harming in the process, as opposed to letting them go or showing them or helping them or moving into another part of the company, whatever it is that needs to be done to help them succeed.
Yeah. So as we kind of complete here, I'm curious, Ben, if I were to ask your heart, what is one gift that you could give in the form of insight, wisdom, maybe a question and insight to help people out there who want to do the things that you've shared today, who want to step into that place of self-awareness, that place of courage, that place of competency, but there's something that's holding them back? What would your heart tell them that could maybe help unleash them in some way?
That's an awfully good question, an awfully difficult question. I think that it has to start with self-knowledge. So the question really is, how does one get self-knowledge? And I think that many of us need the help of someone like yourself, Vered, to actually spend time unraveling who we are and finding the clues as to who we are and building a authentic persona of who we are, and then saying, so what do we want to do with it? And some people can do it by reading self-help book. I think very few people can do that way. Most people need help. And even if they receive the help, many people resist making the changes necessary. So I do not think that everybody has the ability to make the transition. I also think that for some people, it takes a traumatic event like a bankruptcy or the death of someone or something really profound to be able to make a change. I think your Walking on Fire in a seminar is an attempt to create that kind of a, if you will, faux traumatic experience in order to affect change. Whether it succeeds or not, I don't know. But nevertheless, the point is that some people need that trauma before they can really change.
Yeah.
So I don't have any one word or one sentence solution. The search for who we are is important, and arriving at a point where we have a good understanding of who we are, and then looking for ways to exploit that to the maximum, and to use it to serve ourselves and others, I think it really is the essence of wisdom.
Yeah.
However we get there.
Thank you, Ben. And I think that is profoundly valuable for anyone listening, because a lot of people are afraid to look inside,
Right.
and to get to know themselves, and so they look out to try to kind of fulfill what they want, what they need. And I believe that it really does take courage, and it takes a willingness to allow our human spirit, our soul, to express itself. It takes a willingness to be willing to see who we really are, the truth of who we really are. And like you said, to then say, okay, given this, what do I want? What do I want? And what do I need in order to get to what I want, based on where I really am? And I thank you for showing me and showing all of us, number one, that it's possible to do that. Yeah, to look inward. And you've given us a lot of insights about little tidbits about what to do with that information, and how to show up as real and honest, in order to not just be the best that we can be from a competence perspective, but from a place of love and meaning and contribution. Because like you said, that's what it's really about. All paths lead to that. And for that, we need to first accept ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you again for your very kind heart, for your time, for your willingness to share. I know that we could, talk for 10 more hours about.
You're kind. Well, there's so much I could ask you as well. So it's been a one-sided conversation. I know there's so much that I can glean from you as well, Merit. You're very special.
Thank you, Ben. And I feel the same for you. And I'm so grateful for all that you've done for these beautiful souls along the years, for your own children, for all the musicians and the leaders, and the people who need a mentor, a voice to help them and guide them and remind them of what's possible for them. And you're doing that. And I sense that you will do that to the very end, because that's at the core of who you are, to allow that music to be shared, for people to listen to that and be who they are. So thank you from my heart, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you from my heart.
In this new chapter. Enjoy your children, enjoy your beautiful granddaughter, and all those sweet, sweet moments of life.
And as we say here in South Carolina, don't be a stranger.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.